My, you look low. Okay, now we switched so that I have the ability to come in and out without getting your face too dark. Okay, I'd like you to give us your whole name and your date and place of birth.
Oh, Bert. Now I'm going to get my age in there, Bert.
Uh-uh.
All right. Marjorie Goodfellow, March 27th, 1921.
Okay, and where were you born?
Bridgeport, Connecticut.
You were born in a log cabin?
Oh,
Or in a
no, in a hospital.
A hospital. And I'd like you to give us first your earliest childhood memory. First thing you can remember that isn't just something someone told you about.
Well, probably going to school, going to kindergarten in Bridgeport. And then later on moving to Fairfield when I was 11. And
But do you remember something like being in a bassinet at 2.5 years of age and no one would come and get you or something?
Oh, one thing I remember, when I was probably about 3, and there was a bush out in our backyard covered with all these little leaves and made me think of butterflies, and I was always afraid of the butterflies, and I would have a dream that butterflies were after me, and it was the leaves on that bush.
Uh-huh.
That's probably about my earliest memory.
And right before that, right before you can memory, that must be when you saw the snake in the backyard.
Oh, good heavens, yeah.
Had you not liking snake.
Poor Scott.
All that. I hate to jump around, but do you mind telling us that cute story about Scott?
Scott and the snake. Well, I went out in the yard, and Scott was with me. He was about 2, and they were building a stone wall in our backyard. And there was a pile of stones there ready to be put into the wall. And Scott got his foot caught in the stones. And I went over to get him out, and as I looked down, I saw a little snake. And I called for Nancy. You were about 7. And I called for Nancy to come down from upstairs, and I just said, would you come out here for a minute? And when I got her out there, I said, would you get Scott's foot out of that rock? And I didn't tell her why till afterwards. And we rescued Scott, and the snake went off. But I'm terrified of snakes. Scott. Yeah. Or it'd still be there.
Now let's talk a little bit about your folks and what your mom may have told you about any of your family history.
Well, my mother grew up in Middletown, Connecticut.
Give her name.
Florence Beatty, her maiden name, and then she married. My dad was Charles Cederholm.
Would you spell Beatty for us?
Beattie.
Okay.
And her father was Charles R. Beatty. And I never knew my grandmother. Her mother died when she was 8. And my grandfather married again. And so I only knew my step-grandmother, who was very, very nice.
Did your mom tell you of her memories before her mother died, of her mother?
She told me about her school days and her friends in school. And
no, I mean, what, if anything, did she tell you about your grandmother, Beatty?
About my well...
What she might remember from when she was 8 years or younger.
Not really. I don't remember much about that.
She doesn't.
I do know that they had a little boy. There were 4 children, and then he was the 5th. And the little boy, James, died at about the same time, and they were buried together.
Uh-huh.
My mother's younger brother, but...
And what did your grandmother Beatty die of, if you know?
I believe it was tuberculosis.
Oh, okay. And how long? And so she left a young father of 4 children.
Mm-hmm.
So he definitely needed a wife.
Yes, she was hired as a housekeeper and, to tend to the children. And they married a few years after that, I guess, maybe even less. I don't know when they married.
Okay.
She was Scotch. She was from Scotland.
Okay, and the grandmother and grandfather Beatty, where were they from?
Here, Connecticut.
They had-
Way back. Yeah, they go way back. I don't know when they first came over from England.
I know that Dad got a book on the Abbey family.
Yes.
What, if any, equivalent do you have that would take any of your family back, if not through your own research, some source?
Not very far. I don't go beyond my grandparents, really. I don't know much.
You don't know the names of their parents on either side? Okay.
I don't know.
And let's see then, your dad's side.
Well, my dad's mother was Danish, born
Give
in Denmark.
give his name
Charles.
and approximate period of birth and death, if you remember.
My father was Charles Cederholm, born January 18th, 1892, in America.
Mm-hmm.
But his parents, his father was Swedish, and I never knew my grandfather on my father's side, and I did not know my grandmother on my mother's side, but I knew my grandma Cederholm very well. She lived with us, and I had an Aunt Edna and an Uncle Fred, my father's brother and sister. My mother had 3 siblings, 2 sisters and a brother.
Now, the lady from Cooperstown was who?
That's my mother's sister, Aunt Miriam.
Okay,
Miriam.
she's still living?
No, she died a month before my mother.
Oh, okay.
She died April 1993. My mother died in May of 1993.
Now, it seemed to me that Aunt Miriam was in touch more than any of the others.
Yes.
And
Yes,
I think I got to know her.
They were the closest, yes.
Okay. What's your favorite story about your your father by himself? Not something that involves your mother, something either he did as a young man or some trait about him that you think would be interesting.
About my dad. Well, one thing I do know, at the time that my dad was growing up, children could leave school at 14, and they had very little money, and my father was, I believe, the sole support of his mother. I guess he did get help from his brother. They were married. His brother and sister were married at the time. So my dad went to work at 14 at the Bryan Electric, which is a subsidiary of the Westinghouse Corporation. And he went in as a mail boy and worked, I believe, 6 days a week, probably 10 hours a day. He worked many, many hours. And I recall my dad saying he got $3 a week. And he worked himself up, and he became an executive in the corporation. It was a big corporation. The Bryant was pretty big, and he worked himself up, self-educated, I guess you might say, as far as the business was concerned, and he had a very good job and was liked by everybody.
And he stayed basically with the same company his entire working life?
He stayed with them for 51 years, retired at 65.
Where was their office when he retired? Where did he work?
Bridgeport.
Okay. Now, it's always good for a family to get some, the doctor asks you for a family history about illness and that sort of thing. If you could tell us, I know he died of cancer, is that correct? If you could tell us very briefly what his illness was, and maybe whether there are any illnesses that run up or down either side of the family.
Well, he started out with breast cancer. They discovered a lump on his breast, and of course breast cancer at this time is very rare in men. It still is. And then it went into his bones and through his whole body. And he had rheumatism, which I don't know whether that's a form of arthritis, but they called it rheumatism years ago. And he had, his heart, I can't think of the word. Rheumatic heart, yes.
Oh,
He
okay.
was left with a rheumatic heart. And he recovered enough so that when he died at 75, the doctor said that what kept him alive with the cancer was his heart. Heart was strong. So that shows what you can do to help your heart, help yourself.
Did he exercise?
Well, I guess he did. He walked a lot. I know he walked to work, and he did walk, and he worked hard, but he overcame that heart problem.
Now, your mother's illness came on very gradually, and therefore she had a long period of inactivity at the nursing home. What was the final diagnosis of her problem?
I believe just old age. Her body wore out. I think that would be what hers was.
But it doesn't sound like she had Alzheimer's, but more of a like mini strokes.
Is what they call it.
Okay.
Sort of old age, and she was there 11 years.
And most of those years, she really was pretty confused, right?
Yes. Oh, yes.
But before
she
that,
had a stroke.
Before that, she seemed to be one of the nicest persons that you would know.
Yes.
What were her main personality traits?
What was her main
personality trait?
Happy, always happy and smiling, I would say. Yeah.
And really sort of concerned about the feelings and the happiness of the people around her?
Oh, yes.
Is that a fair way to describe it?
And a wonderful mother and a wonderful wife. She was very attentive to my dad. They were both very much in love.
So they didn't fight a whole
lot? No, they didn't. No.
And you had a bit of a luxury in that you had your mom and dad nearby when you were raising your kids, is that right? Can you tell us a little bit about that, what it was like to have your mom?
Oh, great.
Did you live together for a while, didn't you?
Yes.
How did that happen?
Well, that was because we were building a house right after the war, and we couldn't find a rent that would take children. Nobody wanted babies, and we had Nancy. So we decided we were going to build a house, which we did. It took quite a while to build the house, much longer, because things were hard to get after the war. And so we lived with my mother and father till Nancy was 2, and then moved into our home on Bayberry Road in Fairfield.
How did you locate that lot?
Well,
And do you remember the day you drove around and said that would be a nice place to build a house?
I guess it was just one of those things where we liked that little, it was a little circle, and they were just beginning to build. There were a couple of houses on it that were built before the war, and it was after the war building was, going on pretty fast. And we liked that lot. That was it. And it was not too far from my mother, so we did have a close relationship for many years, and she loved to babysit with my children. And if this is going to be seen by my great grandchildren, that would be your great yeah, that would be their ancestors. You and Scott and Dana would end up being their ancestors. And I did have my mother babysit because she just loved it, and it was great for me. But we did do many things together, my mother and I.
Did you drive back when Nancy was 2 years old? Or you had?
But I didn't have a car of my own.
That's what I was going to say. Where Dad would drive to work?
Well, he drove to work, and then if I needed the car, I had to take him to work and then pick him up in the evening. But most of ours was done walking around the neighborhood, and we take the bus and go downtown.
Would you take Nancy with you on the bus?
Yeah, we took her.
Would she behave?
And so, many a time my mother would babysit her, and she'd let me go down by myself. But Yeah, she went down with us, and if children are looking at this many, many years in the future, you probably wonder what downtown was, and maybe you don't even have buses now.
Where was downtown for you? Bridgeport?
Yeah.
And it had a great shopping district, I assume?
Yes, yeah.
No malls at that time?
No. Malls came along in the, I guess in the late 50s, the malls started.
What was the biggest and best clothing store that you would go to?
Reed's.
Okay.
R-E-A-D-S.
There's something I wanted to ask you, I'm going to forget. Oh, what role did you and Dad have in the building of the Bayberry Road house?
Oh, big role.
Explain that if you would.
Great-grandpa.
Were you, I mean, basically you were your own contractor?
Yes, he was his own contractor, so he had to make sure that he got the plumbers, the electricians, and so forth, and he oversaw the whole thing. And so no one was in charge, really, but him. He was when they had to get the carpenters, everyone, and it was rather hectic, because you couldn't get who you wanted, because of everyone wanting to build houses, and sometimes you'd get the plumber lined up, and then he wouldn't be able to make it, he wouldn't show up, and he'd have another job that took longer than he thought. It dragged our building out for so long, and also, we had no water up there, and they had to fill barrels with water, particularly the mason, and then cart the water to our property. But we were guaranteed water by the water company. And a week before we were ready to move into the house, we got a little postcard in the mail that said, "Sorry, we cannot extend the water to your house."
Oh, gee.
So we had to contact a lawyer, and actually we built in an area where it was controlled. It was called Belmoss Manor. So the people that owned all that property, they actually had to take care of getting that lawyer and all for us, but we got the water.
Good. So you didn't have to consider a well and a septic
No,
system and all that?
because Dad, well, your grandpa, our great-grandpa, our great-great-grandpa, he had it in writing that the guarantee, he got that before we even started to build, so he had it in writing by the water company.
Remember what that house cost you to build?
Oh, I'd say about probably 12,000. And then we added on though, and added other rooms and so forth, so it actually totaled more by the time we got through. But when we moved in, I'd say 12,000.
What style was the home, and why did you choose to pick that style?
Colonial. Well, I always liked colonial things, and it was probably a colonial cape, I guess you call it.
Were you happy in school, and were you a pretty good student?
Was I when I was?
When you were a child, yeah.
I was. I got good marks. You know.
Did you feel good about school and about the kids?
School. I didn't like school.
Were the kids nice to you?
Yeah.
Okay.
But I just didn't like school. I worried too much about my homework and so forth.
Okay. Were you active in any clubs or activities in high school?
Oh, yes. I can't remember exactly now. I know I was in the Comians. That was a dramatic group. And
So you performed?
yeah, in a couple of plays.
What was your favorite play?
Oh goodness, I can't remember.
Did you
It was
sing?
about a group of old ladies, I know. I played an old lady. I can't remember the other clubs. French club. I just can't remember.
Did the girls participate in sports back then?
I didn't.
What did they do? Basketball?
They did basketball, field hockey, basketball. I think that might have been it.
Okay. And you stopped your formal education at high school level?
No.
No? What
I
did you
went
do?
further. I went to secretarial school
Okay. Where was that?
in Bridgeport.
Okay. How did the war fit into your plans in life?
Well, the war really was in everyone's lives. And, well, then I was working in another department store down in Bridgeport called Howland's. And then I left to take a job in a war plant.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the plant where they made the Tommy guns.
Okay.
And I was a secretary.
You didn't put the Tommy guns together? No.
No.
Okay. And how old were you and what were the circumstances of your meeting Dad? Bob Goodfellow.
I met him through his brother and sister-in-law who worked at Auto Ordnance, the name of the company that made the Tommy guns. And his sister-in-law, Jean, and I became quite close, very friendly. They were from Pennsylvania, and Jean said one day that her brother-in-law was coming home. He had been over in North Africa, Italy, and Sicily in the war as a navigator bombardier.
So you did not know Dad at all before
No.
he left for the war?
No, I didn't. And
How old would he have been and how old were you at that time?
At the time we met?
Yeah, well, when she was telling you about this cool guy coming back.
22. And so then we began corresponding. And she said, when he comes home, would you want to go out on a date? And I said, well, sure. So then that's how it started.
Where'd you go the first time?
Oh, I think they came over to my house.
Did you play cards or did you go
No,
someplace?
I think we just fought.
Okay, well, see, I'm not even going to ask you about the first kiss or any of that stuff. Well, I won't tell you what my dad said. What did you think of Bob the first time you met him?
I liked him. I thought, you know, I was very nice.
How long before it started to sink in that he was, that you had romantic feelings?
Oh, pretty quickly. We were engaged. We met in February. We were engaged a month later in March.
Okay, so you saw each other nearly every day for that month?
Not for too long, for a short while. We didn't see each other that much. Not in those months that we were married in June, so.
Okay. And how was his service? How did that interfere with your being with each other?
Oh, well, we just worked. He went right overseas again, over to the China, Burma, India theater.
Okay. I'm still not quite clear on this. You met him in January, February, and you got married in June. Was he home all that time?
Not here. He went home. He was back and forth between here and his home in Fort, Pennsylvania.
I mean, he was back in the continental United States for
Yes.
5 months?
Yes. Then
Okay.
we were married in June, and then in July, around July the 10th or 12th, he went overseas again.
For how long?
13 months. 12
Okay.
months. I think it was back the end of July of 45, just before the war ended.
Now, he was in combat quite a bit, is that
Oh,
right?
yes.
Combat areas? Where in the world was he in combat?
North Africa, Italy, Sicily, and then China, Burma, India. And they did do 129 missions all told with the two theaters.
Did he write you during that time?
Oh, yes.
Have you kept those letters? Okay. He probably couldn't tell you much what was going on in the war, could he? There were security requirements? Okay. What do you want to know about your mother, Nancy?
I knew almost everything
Yeah, I
that
think
she told, except that she was an actress.
Oh, I wasn't really, kid stuff.
Right, but that was the one thing that you talked about that I didn't,
Oh.
that you'd never told me.
Oh, well, I wasn't in that much, honey, but, let's see, what was I just gonna say? I was in, in grade school, Stratfield School. I always liked to do that, but, I didn't do that much of it.
How did Dad always seemed to be such an easygoing, pleasant fellow?
Yes.
But you couldn't have been to that many missions without it touching you some way. Did you ever sense what, if anything, it did to change him or affect him?
Well, I do know that he just felt at the time he was to come home after the first duty that he in the European theater, he just had to get home. It was just getting to him. And then again, when he was to come home from the other, I guess that it really was to the point where he just had to stop doing those missions because, it was nerve-wracking. And another thing, it did bother him if he thought about any of his bombs killing anyone down there. He thought, I guess if you thought too much about it, you'd go crazy, but thinking about other people, innocent people that could be down there. And we never talked about it much, but only once, and he said something about that he tried not to think about it, but you couldn't help but think about it.
Well, and we also didn't hear anything from him until one night he got out, and I guess you still have an album that he maintained regarding his wartime experiences. Did he have nightmares or troubles like that after he got back that you can recall? Or?
Not really nightmares. I don't recall any, no. But I'm sure he must have. I'm sure he must have had some.
But he just wouldn't launch into stories or things like that to even talk about that very much.
Yeah, he would. He made a lot of friends, and he would talk about the nice parts, because he always said that wherever he could be, he could make a home, and he would always figure he would do the things that particular area had to offer, or go see the things that were available to him, so that he said he enjoyed that as far as the traveling, what he could see, such as the Taj Mahal in India, and he would take advantage of anything good that he could do in that particular place that he was stationed. But there were a lot of awful times, such as the awful rains, the monsoons in India, and the food that they had to eat, the dried milk and the dried eggs, but he could make a nice a story about it. He wasn't bitter.
Did he ever get hurt?
No.
Okay, so he was never wounded.
No. He almost, the plane, I guess they just about made it. They came in the belly of the plane one time, so he could have been seriously hurt.
Well, since you can only talk for 5 minutes and somehow we only have a minute and a half left on this tape, why don't you try to give us a good summary of starting your life together and what that was like. Here's a guy you'd only known in person for a couple weeks, and then back and forth. Then you didn't see him for 13 months.
Yeah.
When did Nancy arrive in that, and how did you get this family started?
Well, she came along in August of 1946.
Now, does that mean that she was conceived after he came back? I guess that would have to be.
Well, yeah.
It couldn't have been during the 11 months,
After
could
he
it?
came back.
Okay,
Yeah.
I got you. So she was...
Thanks for putting that on.
This is a serious question. She wasn't born while Dad was away.
Oh, no, he was here.
Yeah.
He was working then.
Okay.
He was here.
Okay.
Well, we started planning for a home right away, and
Was he working for Mr. Burr?
worked in the same place.
Wow.
So,
Okay.
can we quit this now?
Well, we're down to 30 seconds, so we're just about ready to. Anything else you wanted to say? I know we're going to have...
All I would like to say is that I had a very happy life with Bob. And we had a wonderful family life, and
Pretty good kids?
great kids, and great family now. I have nice in-laws and grandchildren, and really, I had a wonderful life, probably better than most people.
Okay, thank you.